Okay, so today is a nice short video on expanding your chord vocabulary um, in a very creative way, I think. Something that you don't have to necessarily go out and buy every chord book you can get your hands on and memorize the whole thing, even though that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's good. Go out and get a chord book that's this thick, and then learn all the chords in there. But here's I think, a more fun way to come up with chords on your own. And that's simply taking chords that you already know and just altering them a little bit. And this is a great way to not only expand your chord vocabulary, but expand the whole creative process within yourself. So let's take a look at this process and how it can work for you and your play. Okay, inventing chords is not as hard as you might think. It's as simple as just spreading your fingers out across the fretboard in a way that you've never done before, just hitting random notes. But a more organized approach that's maybe not so overwhelming is to take a note or a chord actually that you already know and just start by changing one note at a time, maybe in intervals of just half steps. So for example, we can take an A chord, and by the way, the tabs, I'll have the examples that we've done for this video in tab form on the website, so that way I don't have to explain all the fingerings for all these chords. So you can take a look at that on andrewsmusiccorner.com under the video, a PDF form of the tabs. Okay, so the A chord, and let's just start by changing one note. Just change the 4th string note. Let's move it just down a half step. Now notice what we had to do. We had to kind of change the fingering of the chord, because you can't just take this 3rd finger and move it down a half step, because what it's going to do is force your 2nd finger down a little bit too far. So keep in mind that when you change notes, you're probably going to have to alter the finger position on the chord. That way you can make the chord in the most efficient way possible, and you're looking for ease. You're looking for how easy it is to make the chord, so make it in the easiest form possible. Let's change another half step. Let's take that note, bring it down a half step from G sharp to G. Again, we have to alter the finger position. Down another half step. So what we did, we took a chord that we already knew, and we made 1, 2, 3 different versions of the chord. You don't have to worry about naming the chord for this particular exercise. However, if you're to that point where you're comfortable with chord formulas, try to name the chord. The chords in this example, of course, you had A major. A major 7 was our first variation. A dominant 7 was the 2nd variation. And A6 was the 3rd variation. But again, that's not really important for the purposes of this video. Don't worry about naming it unless you can, or unless you want to try. All right, so we can take that same chord and maybe let's work on the 3rd string. Let's take that 3rd string and move that note up a half step, so C sharp to D. It's a nice sounding chord. Let's move it up another half step and see what happens. It's kind of an odd sounding chord. Now keep in mind, sometimes the chord is going to sound weird, or it just may sound really bad. Don't worry about that. That's a good thing, because now you know what notes do not work in a scenario like this, and understand that sometimes bad notes are a good thing. You may come across a chord like this, and by itself it might not sound all that great, but paired with another chord, it actually might sound pretty good. So don't discount the odd sounds too quickly, because you might pass over some really great opportunities to come up with a really nice chord. This chord It's essentially just an A with a flat 5. Um, or you can call it an A sharp 11, I think is actually the technical term for this. Um, so that chord could actually have a nice place somewhere. So write those down anyway. Now, sometimes a chord, well, let's take for example, let's change the second string. That's an interesting sound, right? Again, by itself, it might not sound like much. It might sound like a mistake. But I actually, I hear some potential in there. That could be used later on. As a matter of fact, I might actually use that chord. Kind of like it. Okay, so do this with every chord that you know. Even if you only know 5 chords, you're going to take those 5 chords and you're going to multiply them by 2, 3, 4. And your chord vocabulary is just going to blossom just off of simple chords that you already know. Take those chords, the alterations in various forms that you've invented, and write them down immediately. Write them down however you feel comfortable. So manuscript, tablature, chord diagrams, write them down somehow and have a collection of them in a folder, in a notebook, or whatever, and so you've got your own little chord book. Next, after you've done that for many hours, find other chords that go with them, either other chords that you already know or maybe some of these new invented chords that you've discovered, and start pairing them off. An example that I came across several years ago, just messing around with this very practice, was I took a chord that I already knew, which I had, that chord I had just kind of discovered by accident, just by moving fingers around. I took this chord and then I started to change the modified chord. I started to modify the modified chord. I started to move fingers around until I came across this chord. Now, this chord was not unique to me, even though this is the first time I'd ever played it. It was the first time I'd ever heard it. The chord has a name, and somebody somewhere has used it. It's a G sharp minor 9. Later on, I did come across a song that I had to learn that used the chord, which was very helpful because I heard it and immediately I knew what chord it was because I liked the chord so much. So then I started looking for ways that I could incorporate this in a musical situation, which is what your next goal needs to be. Find a chord that works with it. What I was hearing in my head, I was hearing the bass note change to an E. And then I would just go from this G sharp minor 9 to an E suspended second, which was a chord at the time that I already knew. So I'm taking a chord that I already know, pairing it with this new chord, and eventually I came across a nice tune, and I started working on it, and I wrote a song just out of discovering a new chord. So it can be a great creative process. Give it a shot. Take every chord that you know and make it a goal for yourself every day. Every day this week, but I would challenge you to go beyond that. And every day, try to come across a chord that you've never played before and write it down. And this will greatly increase your chord vocabulary. Have fun with it. See you next time.